Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Have you ever looked at a collapsing fishery, a totally gridlocked political system, or, I don't know, even just the utter chaos of your office's shared refrigerator and thought, why can't we all just get along? We usually just blame greed or incompetence, but what if I told you that these massive societal failures are actually just mathematical games? And better yet, what if we could actually decode those games and solve them? Well, today, we're going to look right under the hood at the hidden architecture of human behavior.
So here's the central mystery we're going to unravel today. Think of this as the ultimate detective story of human behavior. Why in the world do entirely rational, logical people intentionally make choices that guarantee a worse outcome for everyone involved, including themselves? I know, it seems like a total paradox, right? But by the end of this explainer, you're going to see exactly why this happens, and more importantly, how we can actually stop it. All right, here is our roadmap for today. We're covering 1. The architecture of coordination. 2. Mapping the strategic games. 3. Anatomy of coordination failure. 4. The tipping point of trust. And finally, 5. Engineering a better game.
Let's kick things off with part 1, the architecture of coordination.
Okay, let's start by setting the stage for literally every strategic game we play. Imagine a spectrum. On one far end at 0, we have virtually pure conflict. On the other end at 1, virtually pure common interest. And sitting right there in the middle is this thing called the HEA parameter. HEA represents that fundamental, everyday tension between teaming up with others and just acting selfishly. Mathematically speaking, it measures the size of the improvement you gain from cooperating compared to the temptation you feel to just defect and look out for number 1. Every single human interaction exists somewhere on this line.
No, if we get incredibly lucky, we land in this beautiful, harmonious ideal known as the invisible hand game. This is where individual and collective incentives just perfectly align. Think about it. If you pursue your own self-interest, say, growing the specific crop you're best at farming, you actually inadvertently maximize the benefits for your partner too. There's zero coordination failure here because the system naturally rewards everyone for doing exactly what's best for the group. It is the perfect benchmark.
Moving right along to part 2, mapping the strategic games.
So, to understand why things actually break down, we need to quickly de-jargonize a really crucial mathematical concept, the Nash equilibrium. Don't think of this as the best outcome. Think of it more like an escapable black hole of self-interest. It's kind of like standing up at a concert just to see better. Once everyone stands up, no one can see better. But if you sit down alone, you see absolutely nothing. It's this stuck state where neither player wants to change their strategy, assuming the other person's choice stays exactly the same. And let me tell you, once you fall into a Nash equilibrium, it is extremely difficult to escape, even if a vastly better reality is sitting right there, just out of reach. And that brings us to our first major strategic trap, the prisoner's dilemma. This brilliantly shows how the pursuit of dominant, self-interested strategies inherently drags everyone away from the best outcome, straight down into a defect trap. That trap, that's our Nash equilibrium. The pursuit of dominant, self-interested strategies literally inflicts unaccounted harm on everyone else. Both players are acting rationally to protect themselves, sure, but as a result, they lock themselves into this structurally inferior trap where both walk away with a much worse outcome. Let's actually ground this in reality for a second with the tragedy of fishers. Imagine we have 2 fishers, J and I. They both do great if they only fish for 6 hours a day. But man, the temptation is always there to overfish for 8 hours. So why not just shake hands and promise to stick to 6 hours? Well, because of a massive information barrier. Torn binding agreements happen because without a trusted third party to actually verify the catches, promises just evaporate into thin air. Time, repeated interactions, even the best of intentions, they are completely useless if actions can't be verified.
All right, part 3, anatomy of coordination failure.
So the real crucial tipping point here is a failure to reach what we call Pareto optimality. Basically, when a non-cooperative interaction completely misses the best possible outcome, bam, we have a coordination failure. And it is absolutely critical to realize here that this isn't merely some bad choice made by a selfish individual. No, it's a structural failure of the environment itself to align incentives. The game itself is broken, not the players. Now, I just mentioned Pareto optimal. That really just means the absolute best outcome for everyone, where you literally can't make one person better off without hurting the other. We represent that mathematically as the Pareto frontier. But here's the catch. There are an infinite number of really great agreements all along that curve. So if we actually manage to escape our Nash equilibrium trap,
Who decides exactly where we land? Well, the first mover. By making a firm take it or leave it offer, they basically capture the vast majority of the surplus simply because they pre-committed first. Which takes us to part 4, the tipping point of trust. Welcome to the assurance game. Now, here, the core problem is entirely different. Both cooperating and defecting are Nash equilibria. The issue isn't the temptation to cheat anymore, it's the sheer paralyzing uncertainty of what the other person's going to do. Think about, say, adopting a brand new software platform at work, or participating in a strike. You want to cooperate for sure, but only if you are fully assured the other person will too. If you doubt them even a little, fear takes over and you retreat right back to the safe, risk-dominant equilibrium. Which brings us to genuinely one of the most powerful concepts in behavioral economics, P star. This exact mathematical threshold is the critical balancing point. It literally determines whether your environment is going to foster a solid bedrock of trust or just completely break down into fear and stagnation. Picture a probability scale. P is just your belief that the other person will cooperate. The threshold right there in the middle, that's our P star. So let's say the math of a particular game sets that threshold at 2/3. If your belief that your partner will cooperate drops to just 50%, which obviously is below the threshold, the entire scale tips. The expected payoff of defecting is now mathematically higher, and the strictly rational choice flips straight to defection. Just like that, trust is completely broken. And what this means for society at large is pretty profound. You can have identical people with identical resources facing the exact same situations, but experiencing completely different fates. And it's based entirely on their path-dependent initial beliefs. High initial trust pushes belief past the P-star threshold, sparking this virtuous cycle that leads to systemic wealth. But on the flip side, low initial trust keeps belief below the threshold, dragging everyone down into a poverty trap of systemic stagnation. You see, coordination problems in assurance games are driven by strategic complementarity, which is just a fancy way of saying your individual payoff increases when others take the exact same action. High trust loops upward into the smooth adoption of conventions and systemic wealth. But low trust, that drops P below the threshold, forcing a downward loop. It's a retreat to a risk-dominant equilibrium that totally cements an inescapable poverty trap. And finally, part 5, engineering a better game. Okay, before we start building, we've got to synthesize our diagnostics. If we're in an invisible hand game, great, there is no failure. If it's a prisoner's dilemma, the Pareto optimum is not the Nash equilibrium. So our problem is how to stay in an optimum because of that structural temptation we talked about. But if it's an assurance game, the optimum is a Nash equilibrium, but our problem is how to get there by overcoming structural fear. Identifying the specific game we are in absolutely dictates our solution. Now, we noted earlier that an infinite number of good outcomes exist on the Pareto frontier, but here is the architectural reality. Economics alone cannot dictate which final outcome we reach. It simply cannot solve the distribution problem on its own. Therefore, societies have to build external rules. We need first-mover rules to allocate power, fairness norms to decide what's actually acceptable, and robust third-party enforcement to really anchor our expectations. We can actually apply this conceptually into real-world policy engineering in 3 steps. First, we start with our original prisoner's dilemma, the one stuck in conflict. Second, policymakers step in and apply a rule. Cooperation is now the norm, and violators must compensate the victims. Third, the math literally changes. By enforcing compensatory damages, the system is mathematically forced out of pure conflict and into a unique new equilibrium of cooperation. Boom, we fix the game. So let's distill all of this into the ultimate strategist's blueprint. This gives you 3 actionable steps to deploy in the real world. Step 1, identify the architecture. Are you fighting the temptation of a prisoner's dilemma or the sheer uncertainty of an assurance game? Step 2, calculate the risk. You've got to evaluate the tipping point of trust, that P star. And step 3, engineer the matrix. Please do not rely on just goodwill to solve structural failures. Deploy external institutions, draft fully verifiable contracts, and establish strict enforcement norms to mathematically force a cooperative outcome. Because ultimately, folks, coordination is never an accident. It is a carefully, mathematically designed architecture. So now that you have the blueprint to diagnose structural failure, to measure the exact tipping point of trust, and to quite literally rewrite the incentives of human behavior, what broken game in your own world will you engineer next? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep analyzing the game.